William Lloyd Garrison was a fiery abolitionist and radical reformer who became one of the most uncompromising voices against slavery in American history. William Lloyd Garrison, the passionate newspaper editor and moral crusader, was born in Newburyport, Massachusetts on December 10, 1805. He came from humble beginnings, the son of an immigrant sailing master who abandoned the family when William was just 3 years old. Garrison's childhood was marked by poverty and hardship. His mother Fanny struggled to support 3 children, sometimes forced to place young William with other families when she could not feed him herself. Despite these difficulties, his mother instilled in him a deep Baptist faith and a strong moral compass that would guide his entire life. Garrison received only a basic education in the public schools of Newburyport. He was homeschooled by his mother in religious matters and learned the values of hard work and perseverance through necessity. At age 13, Garrison was apprenticed to a shoemaker, but he found the work unfulfilling. His true calling came when he was apprenticed to the editor of the Newburyport Herald at age 14. There, Garrison learned the printing trade and discovered his gift for writing. He spent 7 years as an apprentice printer, absorbing the craft of journalism and developing the powerful writing style that would make him famous. By age 20, he had become the editor of his own newspaper, though that first venture failed quickly. In the late 1820s, Garrison began to focus his attention on the issue of slavery. He was not initially an abolitionist. Like many Americans of his time, he first supported the colonization movement, which sought to send freed slaves back to Africa. This was considered a moderate position, one that acknowledged slavery was wrong but did not demand immediate action or equality for Black Americans. Garrison worked briefly as the editor of a temperance newspaper in Vermont, where he also began writing about political issues. His views were evolving, becoming more radical with each passing year. The transformation of William Lloyd Garrison from moderate reformer to radical abolitionist came through his friendship with Benjamin Lundy, a Quaker abolitionist who published the newspaper Genius of Universal Emancipation. In 1829, Garrison moved to Baltimore to work as co-editor of Lundy's paper. There, in the heart of a slave state, Garrison witnessed the horrors of slavery firsthand. He saw slave coffles being marched through the streets, families torn apart at auction, and the brutal reality of human bondage. The experience radicalized him completely. Garrison rejected colonization and embraced immediate abolition. He began writing fierce denunciations of slavery and those who profited from it. Garrison's uncompromising rhetoric got him into trouble almost immediately. In 1830, he wrote an article accusing a Newburyport merchant of engaging in the domestic slave trade by transporting slaves to Louisiana. The merchant sued for libel, and Garrison was convicted and sentenced to jail. He could not pay the fine and spent 7 weeks in a Baltimore jail cell. Far from silencing him, the imprisonment only strengthened his resolve. Garrison used his time in jail to write poetry and essays about slavery. He emerged from prison more determined than ever to dedicate his life to the abolition of slavery. After his release from jail, Garrison returned to the North with a mission. He would start his own newspaper, one devoted entirely to the immediate abolition of slavery without compensation to slaveholders. On January 1, 1831, the first issue of the Liberator was published in Boston. Garrison was the editor, publisher, and primary writer. He had almost no money, few subscribers, and no financial backing. The newspaper operated out of a small office with borrowed equipment. But what the Liberator lacked in resources, it made up for in passion and conviction. The first issue of the Liberator announced Garrison's philosophy in unmistakable terms. He wrote that he would be harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice on the subject of slavery. He declared that he would not equivocate, he would not excuse, he would not retreat a single inch, and he would be heard. These words became his manifesto. Garrison rejected the gradualist approach that most anti-slavery advocates favored. He demanded immediate emancipation. He called slavery a sin and slaveholders sinners. He refused to compromise or soften his message to make it more palatable to those who were uncomfortable with his radicalism. The Liberator never achieved a large circulation. At its peak, it had only about 3,000 subscribers, and most of those were free Black Americans in the North who supported Garrison's uncompromising stance. White Americans, even many who opposed slavery, found Garrison's rhetoric too extreme. He not only attacked slavery but also attacked the Constitution itself, calling it a covenant with death and an agreement with hell because it protected slavery. Garrison burned a copy of the Constitution in public to demonstrate his contempt for a document that sanctioned human bondage. Such actions horrified moderate Americans who believed in working within the system. Garrison's radical abolitionism made him one of the most hated men in America. In the South, he was seen as a dangerous fanatic who threatened the entire social and economic order. Southern states passed laws making it illegal to distribute abolitionist literature. Rewards were offered for Garrison's capture, with some bounties reaching thousands of dollars. Southern politicians blamed Garrison and his newspaper for inciting slave rebellions. When Nat Turner led a slave revolt in Virginia in August 1831, just months after the Liberator began publication, many Southerners held Garrison responsible, though there was no evidence Turner had ever seen the newspaper. But Garrison was not safe in the North either. Many Northern businessmen had economic ties to the South and feared that agitation over slavery would disrupt profitable trade relationships. Northern workers feared that freed slaves would compete with them for jobs. Racial prejudice was widespread even among those who opposed slavery. In October 1835, a mob attacked Garrison in Boston. He was dragged through the streets with a rope around his body. The mob intended to tar and feather him or worse. He was only saved when the mayor intervened and had him placed in jail for his own protection. The Boston mob violence shocked many Americans and actually helped Garrison's cause by demonstrating the violent opposition to free speech. In 1833, Garrison helped found the American Anti-Slavery Society, an organization dedicated to immediate abolition. He wrote its Declaration of Sentiments, which called for the immediate end of slavery without compensation to slaveholders and full equality for Black Americans. The society grew rapidly, establishing chapters throughout the North and sending out lecturers to spread the abolitionist message. For several years, Garrison was the leading figure in the organized abolition movement. He traveled extensively, giving speeches and organizing new anti-slavery societies. Garrison's abolitionism was intertwined with other radical causes. He was an early supporter of women's rights, insisting that women should have full participation in the anti-slavery movement. This position was controversial even among abolitionists. When women began speaking publicly against slavery, they faced harsh criticism. Garrison defended their right to speak and to participate equally in the movement. His support for women's rights led to a major split in the abolition movement in 1840. More conservative abolitionists formed a separate organization that excluded women from leadership roles. Garrison remained with the American Anti-Slavery Society, which welcomed women as full members. Garrison also embraced Christian perfectionism and non-resistance. He believed that true Christians should not participate in violence or in government, which he saw as inherently coercive and violent. He refused to vote or hold office. He opposed all wars and all use of force. This pacifist philosophy put him at odds with abolitionists who believed that slavery might need to be ended through violence. When John Brown raided Harper's Ferry in 1859, attempting to start a slave rebellion through armed insurrection, many abolitionists praised Brown as a martyr. Garrison was conflicted. He admired Brown's courage and dedication but could not endorse his violent methods, though his pacifism began to waver in the face of slavery's intransigence. Throughout the 1840s and 1850s, Garrison continued to publish the Liberator and to agitate for abolition. He attacked not only slavery but also the churches that tolerated it, the politicians who compromised with it, and the Constitution that protected it. He called for the North to secede from the South, arguing that free states should not be complicit in slavery. His slogan was "No union with slaveholders." This position seemed impractical to many Americans who believed the Union must be preserved. Garrison countered that a Union built on slavery was not worth preserving. Garrison's influence on the abolition movement was profound but also divisive. His uncompromising moral stance inspired many to join the cause, particularly free Black Americans who saw in Garrison a white ally who truly believed in racial equality. Frederick Douglass, the famous escaped slave and abolitionist leader, initially worked closely with Garrison and credited him with helping to launch his career as a speaker and writer. But even Douglas eventually broke with Garrison over questions of tactics and philosophy. Douglas came to believe that the Constitution could be interpreted as an anti-slavery document and that political action was necessary. Garrison rejected both positions. The 1850s brought increasing sectional tension over slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required Northerners to assist in capturing escaped slaves, making them complicit in slavery. Garrison denounced the law and supported those who violated it. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 opened new territories to slavery, leading to violent conflict in Kansas. The Dred Scott decision of 1857 declared that black Americans could not be citizens. Each of these events seemed to vindicate Garrison's argument that compromise with slavery was impossible and that the conflict could only be resolved through the complete abolition of the institution. When the Civil War began in April 1861, Garrison faced a dilemma. As a pacifist, he opposed war. But he recognized that the war might end slavery. Initially, President Lincoln insisted the war was only about preserving the Union, not about ending slavery. Garrison criticized Lincoln for not making abolition the war's goal. But when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, declaring slaves in rebel states to be free, Garrison praised the president. He began to support the war effort as a crusade for freedom. His pacifist principles gave way to the practical reality that slavery would be ended through military force. Garrison lived to see the triumph of his life's work. The 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery throughout the United States, was ratified in December 1865. After 35 years of publication, Garrison decided to cease publication of the Liberator. The final issue appeared on December 29, 1865. In his farewell editorial, Garrison declared that his work was done. Slavery had been abolished. The immediate goal he had fought for since 1831 had been achieved. He was 60 years old and ready to step back from the front lines of reform. But Garrison did not retire from public life entirely. He continued to speak out on issues of justice and equality. He supported the 14th and 15th Amendments, which granted citizenship and voting rights to black Americans. He recognized that legal freedom was not enough and that true equality required ongoing struggle. He continued to support women's rights, temperance, and other reform causes. He also worked to support the freedmen in the South, raising money for schools and advocating for their rights. Garrison's later years were marked by financial struggle. He had never made money from the Liberator, which operated at a loss for its entire existence. He had supported his family through gifts from supporters and occasional paid lectures. In 1867, his admirers raised a fund of over $30,000 to provide for his old age. This financial security allowed him to live comfortably in his final years. He divided his time between Boston and New York, where his daughter lived. William Lloyd Garrison's health declined in the 1870s. He suffered from various ailments and gradually reduced his public activities. He made his last public appearance in 1879, attending a meeting of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. On May 24, 1879, William Lloyd Garrison died in New York City at the age of 73. His funeral was held in Boston, and he was buried in the Forest Hill Cemetery. Thousands mourned his passing, recognizing him as one of the great moral crusaders of the 19th century. Garrison's legacy is complex and controversial. He was unquestionably one of the most important figures in the abolition movement. His uncompromising moral stance helped to shift public opinion on slavery from seeing it as a necessary evil to recognizing it as an absolute wrong that must be immediately ended. He gave voice to the radical idea that black Americans deserved not just freedom but full equality. He challenged the churches, the government, and the Constitution itself to live up to their professed ideals. His newspaper, though small in circulation, had an enormous impact on the national debate over slavery. Yet Garrison's methods were also criticized, both in his own time and by later historians. His harsh rhetoric and his refusal to compromise alienated potential allies. His attacks on the Constitution and his call for disunion seemed impractical and even dangerous to many who opposed slavery but believed in working within the political system. His splits with other abolitionists over tactics and philosophy weakened the movement at crucial moments. Some historians argue that more moderate abolitionists who worked through politics were more effective in actually ending slavery than Garrison's moral crusading. Garrison himself would likely have rejected such criticisms. He believed that moral truth could not be compromised and that gradualism was simply another form of complicity with evil. He argued that his role was to hold up the ideal of immediate abolition and complete equality, even if practical politicians had to find ways to achieve those goals incrementally. He saw himself as a prophet calling society to repentance, not as a politician crafting legislation. His uncompromising stance, he believed, was necessary to move the center of debate and to make more moderate positions possible. The debate over Garrison's legacy reflects broader questions about social change and moral reform. How do societies confront deep-seated evils? Is uncompromising moral witness more effective than practical political compromise? Can radical agitators and moderate reformers work together, or do they inevitably come into conflict? These questions remain relevant today as Americans continue to grapple with issues of justice and equality. What is undeniable is that William Lloyd Garrison dedicated his entire adult life to the cause of abolition with a single-minded intensity that few have matched. He endured poverty, imprisonment, mob violence, and constant vilification. He never wavered in his commitment to immediate abolition and racial equality. He used the power of the written word to challenge his nation's conscience. He built a movement that, while never commanding majority support, helped to make slavery a central moral and political issue that the nation could no longer ignore. Garrison was a man of his time, shaped by the evangelical Christianity and reform movements of the early 19th century. But he was also ahead of his time in his commitment to racial equality and women's rights. He recognized that slavery was not just a political or economic issue but a moral evil that corrupted the entire society. He understood that ending slavery would require a fundamental transformation of American society and values. In this sense, he was a revolutionary, though one who believed in moral suasion rather than violent overthrow. William Lloyd Garrison remains a towering figure in American history, a man who heard the cries of the enslaved and devoted his life to their liberation. He was uncompromising, difficult, self-righteous, and absolutely certain of his moral rectitude. He was also courageous, principled, and unwavering in his commitment to justice. He challenged America to live up to its founding ideals of liberty and equality for all. His voice, harsh and uncompromising as it was, helped to end the greatest evil in American history and to push the nation toward a more perfect union.